Okay, and we are live, I believe, if all has gone well and our setup here is working. So now wait a minute. It may be that that's not working. Have I lost Brad? There he is. Okay.
Hello. I just switched my camera. I'm sorry.
So I'm here today with Brad Libby. Well, let me correct that. Dr. Brad Libby, because we're talking about Brad's book, The Pattern of Progress. I have one of the very rare test copies. These are going to be collector's items for sure at some point. And so Brad's book, The Pattern of Progress, is just launched, and this is it represents the culmination of years, literally, of research work that Brad has done as a senior research fellow on our research team at Rethink X. It's an amazing piece of scholarship. It's absolutely destined to become an authoritative text in the canon of technological history and literature and technology theory. It's just going to become required reading in any course that has anything to do with the history of technology. This is absolutely on the required reading list for anybody who's interested at all in disruption and in Rethink X's work, in the work of Tony Seba, and the work of Clayton Christensen, and anybody else along those lines. This is an absolute tour de force of research work, and it's a fantastically accessible, interesting, funny read at many places as you go through it. So, Brad, I just can't say enough. I cannot heap enough praise on this work of yours. So, and it's finally out in the wild. It's live. It's available right now on Amazon, paperback and digital. You can get it. You can order it this second, which I absolutely recommend everybody do. And so let's start at last talking about this publicly, because this project has been in the works for years and it's been a monumental effort. So let me also be the first person to say in public, congratulations, man. This is an epic piece of work.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I have been working on it for years. I mean, obviously, it's a team effort too. So all of this started out 2018, really. So we message each other at Rethink X using a tool called Slack, which is very popular. And if you're a computer programmer or something like that, you've probably heard of it. But it's just a messaging tool. It's like WhatsApp or any other way of keeping in touch with each other. And early 2018, Tony Seba sent a message on this. He started a new channel on disruptions in history, basically just saying, he's been looking at disruptions of all different kinds. He's written about, by 2018, he had published, Solar Trillions. He had published Clean Disruption. He published Rethinking Transportation. So he's interested in lithium-ion batteries and electric cars and solar panels. And, if you're familiar with his work at all, I don't have to go through the whole list of all the things that he's talked about in public, for different business models, different technologies in energy and transportation, in food and agriculture. So he said, he sent out this message that basically said, I'm curious about all the different disruptions in history, and I'd like to collect them all together in one channel. And then, that started out as sort of an interest and a hobby, and then it grew to
Tony did not know what Pandora's box he was opening with you there, man.
No. So, like anything, it grabs a hold of you, and soon, like anything that's a pattern, and that's why I called it the pattern of progress. You see this pattern, and it seems so obvious once somebody points it out. It's like, if you've listened to Tony's presentations, if you've read his books, at some point you slapped yourself in the forehead and said, "Why didn't I think of that?" It's so obvious and simple once somebody points it out to you. And before that, it was not. It's kind of like Darwin's theory of evolution. It's like before that, you see that there are a million different species on Earth, and then after that, you say, "Oh yeah, that's why." There are all these animals that look like each other, and now you have to go back and sort of rethink everything you know about the world based on this pattern that somebody showed you. And that's how it was with Tony. He said, look at cars. Look at he has this presentation on transportation where he talks about New York City in 1900 and New York City in 1913, and shows off two photos of in 1900 transportation was horse driven, literally, and in 1913 and by the 1920s, the rest of the world, it was automobiles, and it literally took a 13-year period or so. So you don't have to take two photographs word for it. You can look up the data from the number of registered automobiles in the United States by year. And we know the number of horses. The U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Census Department both have estimates on the number of horses, and there are records by state, number of cars. So you too can make a graph of the number of horses and the number of cars in the U.S. But then Tony says, but wait, there's more. It's not just the number of horses, the number of cars. You have to look at the fact that cars go a longer distance every year than horses. So a car might travel 5, 6, 7, 10 times as much in a year. So if you look at the amount of traveling done by cars and the amount of traveling done by horses, not just the number of cars and the number of horses, then the disruption from horses to cars was even faster. So it didn't take decades. It took literally 13 years to go from basically 10% car-based transportation in the U.S. and all the U.S., not just New York City, but all the U.S. From 10% to 80% took 13 years. And so I said, okay, well, and Tony has collected all sorts of examples. And I said, well, I'll collect a few of my own. People are always talking about, digital cameras, film cameras getting replaced with digital cameras, whatever, VCRs. So yeah,
a few of your own.
So I said a few, so that we have some new examples. We don't have to keep going back to the same well of examples. Let's just collect as many as we can. And Tony has said that he's looked at every technology going back to agriculture. And I said, why stop there? We were inventing tools before agriculture. There were stone tools and bows and arrows and everything else, obsidian knives or whatever before that. So we can go before agriculture. We can go before Homo sapiens. So we didn't invent fire. We didn't invent stone tools. Homo habilis invented stone tools. That wasn't us. There were technologies that Neanderthals invented. So we've discovered in a cave in France or this twine. So 3-fiber twine just take fibers and roll them together between your fingers. So that it wasn't humans. Or whatever, Homo sapiens, it was Homo neanderthalensis. So with Homo habilis, at least they were our direct ancestors, but Neanderthals weren't. So they're more like cousins to us. But that wasn't us who invented thread. And so I started collecting examples. And, over the past 7 years now, this was 2018 that this project started. Over the past 7 years, I've looked at about 2,000 different technologies. It's not quite 2,000. I want to say 2,000, but 1,700, 1,800 technologies that we're up to. I had to come up with this system, there's spreadsheets and folders collecting all the different scientific papers, because we're looking at, like I said, U.S. Department of Agriculture reports. We're looking at U.S. statistical abstract, the U.K. statistical abstract, Canadian government records, and published scientific works from historians. So I'm not we're collecting, trying to be as quantitative as possible, looking at for every technology that I could think of, when one technology replaced another, how many of it were produced and what was its cost and how much better was it than the next best alternative, and where was it invented and who invented it, and when did it first become a commercial product, and when did it reach 10% market adoption, and when did it reach 80% market adoption, and where did this happen, literally the geographic coordinates of north, south, east, west, geographic coordinates, and how old was the inventor when they invented it, so that we can do this sort of analysis. And like I said, we've got literally thousands technically of examples now. And then we said, okay, you start to sort it alphabetically, you start to sort it chronologically, of when technology was invented, and you basically then have the interconnection of when, earlier technologies leading to later technologies. So Neanderthal invented thread, we adopted thread, we started weaving baskets, we started weaving clothing. Thread becomes the key to making, weaving silk. The jacquard loom with the punch cards in it becomes the basis of computers. And here we are today, using computers to talk to each other. And one of the key technologies for this was invented by Neanderthals 50,000 years ago. So you start to get
for anybody who's watching and who's familiar with, it's a trope in video games, but the idea of a technology tree that you progress through, the very famous game series Civilization is a prime example of this, but it's found in a variety of simulation and real-time strategy and strategy games. And so Brad has basically created the definitive technology tree of human history. And there have been some other attempts at this, but nothing compares to the work that you've done. There's nothing like it. It's in a league of its own.
I don't know if I would agree with that. I've seen some that are quite impressive. There are people who understand this concept as well, that technologies, one leads to another, and there is a sort of real technology tree of history. So I have seen people who have mapped out things that are very impressive pieces of work, and it's not really fair to do a direct comparison based on the number of my.
Well, you're very kind and modest, but to my eye, this what you've done is just absolutely crushes it.
Thanks. I think what sets mine apart from others is other people have tried to map out the interconnections between technologies and history. What I've also done is done the quantitative data gathering on how quickly these things happened, how quickly a new technology was adopted, and just how many were produced per year, what the price was, that sort of stuff, so that we can get the experience curve, the cost curve over time. And that's important because it tells you, you can do projections into the future. So the idea here it's not just about technologies in the past. This is part of, like I started saying at the beginning, Tony and Rethink X's investigations into how new technologies replace old technologies, and that's going on to this day. Obviously, I mean, you can't read news without seeing something about AI. Tesla's robo taxi service, which looks like they're starting it next week in Texas. Waymo is already going, and they're growing exponentially. Precision fermentation, where we're seeing the cost of producing meat and proteins coming down, meat through cellular agriculture, but precision fermentation for individual molecules coming down dramatically. The possibility space opening up of new things that just weren't possible before, of producing lactoferrin, which is a key protein in milk, and very nutritious and healthy, but also limited in its supply. But now you can make it, essentially at any scale you want to. And there are plenty of times throughout history where, things that were very precious and rare suddenly became very plentiful. Aluminum, for instance, which was more expensive than gold, then it became more expensive than silver. And literally, like, the tip of the Washington Monument is a block of silver. And the US government made that thing literally like a year or two before we figured out the whole Hero process of how to make aluminum like 100 times cheaper. So here
I think you said a block of silver, but you meant a block of aluminum. It's the tip of the Washington Monument is aluminum.
Right, it's aluminum.
Back when it was precious metal, not something that is disposable.
Yeah. So when they made the tip of the Washington Monument, they put it on display at Tiffany's in New York. Because it was the largest piece of aluminum ever made, and it's only like 6 pounds. It's like 3 kilograms or something. I don't remember the exact weight. But nowadays, you can buy that much aluminum for a couple of dollars. Go on eBay. You can get a block of aluminum that big, and for a few dollars. But back when it was cast, it was the largest piece of aluminum ever made. Its price was the same as silver, basically. So the U.S. government bought this thing literally a couple of years before the price of aluminum just collapsed. But they put it on display in Tiffany's so that people could go in, and they put it on the floor, and I guess they had a couple of stairs on either side of it. so that you go up a couple of stairs on one side, step over it, and go down the stairs on the other side, and be able to tell all of your friends that I stepped over the tip of the Washington Monument, um, back when it was lying on the floor. But we see this, this pattern happen over and over again, where things that were expensive become much cheaper, and therefore anybody can do it. So things like photography, which, you used to have rolls of film and you only had 24 photos. So you had to ration your photos, decide if it was worth taking this photo when you're on holiday or something. And now people, you can take as many pictures as you want. You don't even think about how much it costs to make one. There were times when people had cassette tapes and there were 8 songs on one side and 10 on the other or something. And if you had a stack of cassette tapes that had 15 songs each, and if you had even 100 of them or whatever, you had a fraction of the songs that you can have now, just by going on YouTube or any Spotify or whatever else, and listening to what you want to listen to when you want to listen to it. And we've seen this pattern happen many, many times before. Something that was expensive, suddenly we found a way to do it 10 times cheaper. It becomes a lot less expensive. It becomes a lot more popular. And it not only replaces the way that we did things before, it greatly expands the market. And that's what I call the pattern of progress. So, mobile phone lines. You used to have a line of a phone that went into the house, and then with mobile phones, cell phones, it becomes everybody has one of their own, basically. So the number of phone subscribers in India in the year 2000 was something like 100 million. It was less than 10% of the population. 10, 15 years later, literally the 13 years, if you want to call it that, that Tony found, there were approaching 1 billion subscribers. So most of the population of India, 75%, 13 years later. And we see this pattern over and over again, of one technology replacing the other in a 10 to 15, 20-year period. And then it greatly expands the market as well, and kills off the old market, more or less.
Yeah, it is remarkable that it's technologies of all different kinds. It's not limited to one specific culture or one specific economic system or one specific political or governance structure or set of institutions. I mean, this has been happening throughout human history across the world, and I think that's the thing that's so remarkable about it. It is. I think it stands to reason that you can credit to, in large part, sort of just very elemental economic incentives and drives behind the basic dynamics that are there. That if there is a new form of practical knowledge, in other words, there's a new kind of know-how, which is about as simple of a definition of technology as you can come up with. If there's a new kind of know-how that emerges and it works, and it is know-how that allows you to achieve a result of some kind, to create some sort of, or embody some sort of value in a good or a service. It's just some way of getting something done or achieving something or having something that's of use, that's got utility, that's valuable. If there is a way of obtaining that is substantially better as a value proposition, in other words, it works as well for a small fraction of the cost, or some combination of cost and capability or quality delivered, it just represents a step change, a big improvement over the old way of doing things. People simply switch. There's natural incentive to economize in that way, and that, again, that sort of transcends culture and politics and social institutions of the day, or any of those sorts of geography. It transcends geography. This is a pattern that really is very deeply present in human civilization, and even into, as you were saying, into human prehistory. So that's the remarkable thing. I mean, it isn't just whiz bang digital technologies that follow this pattern. It is when we talk about technology and disruption, and the latest AI or the robots are going to be disruptive, or new energy technologies, or new high-tech food technologies that involve precision biotech and that kind of stuff. That all sounds high tech. But this pattern is all tech. It's not limited to just high tech. And so you have fantastic examples in the book. There the idea that that same sort of 10% to 80%, the minority to the majority of the way, of the way things are done, happening in a 13-year period. I mean, this, to see that in Neolithic arrowheads, to see that in fabric dyes, to see that in carpenter's nails, and things that are decidedly not not high tech, right?
Right.
Not digital, not cutting edge, nothing to do with computers, nothing to do with satellites or rockets or anything high tech at all. And yet it is the same fundamental pattern. That is the thing that is truly remarkable. And it's like you said at the beginning of the conversation. It's something that where it's so plain that you wonder why it hasn't been self-evident forever. Why is this pattern, which is so pervasive, so recurring, and so deeply fundamental that this spans these across different categories and domains and societies and cultures? Why isn't this just a known fact that's just a fact of life that everybody's aware of intuitively? Oh, I just know this thing. It's totally obvious.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
very strange in itself. The fact that this is sort of was hiding in plain sight is a remarkable aspect to the work here. And then, sorry, just one last point before you riff on it, is the fact that this has happened so many times. It's not like
Yes.
it's 20 things throughout human history. You found more than 1,500. It's 1,500. It's 1,700 plus and counting. My money's you're going over 2,000 in the not too distant future here, right? I mean, especially as you did a lot of this. I mean, it's a 7-year-old project. You did a lot of this work the hard way, reading with your own eyes. It's getting easier to discover new examples with the help of the latest AI technologies that can read all of human literature and so forth. So my money is you're going to get over the 2,000 mark pretty shortly here. This is remarkable too, that there are so many examples of the same pattern. Like how did we miss this? It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in all fairness, there are people who have published, on this topic before. I'm not claiming to invent or think that I discovered the idea that there's an S-shaped pattern to adoption of new technology, or that I'm the first one to notice that as things get cheaper, people buy more of them. I mean, this is like
no, of course not. Yes, you're right. I mean, that's not what we're saying though.
But I mean, there's people. Everett Rogers, who wrote The Diffusion of Innovations, Clayton Christensen, who's written numerous books on the innovator's dilemma and its application to other various areas of life. Tony, of course. But there are other people who have noticed this before. What I've done, like you said, is some of the legwork of just collecting these examples, going out to published scientific papers and previously published books, and it has gotten easier in the last year or so. Unfortunately, I wrapped up a lot of the writing just as the AI tools were getting good enough to say, Brad, you could 10x this work if you had if you'd had these tools a few years ago. But yeah, it is, all various aspects of life. It's energy, it's transportation, it's food and agriculture and materials and labor saving technologies and information and communications and things like that. And I say in the book that, technologies change over time, but human needs do not. We've always preferred to not freeze to death in the wintertime. We've worn clothes. We want to communicate with each other, and cook our food and that sort of stuff. We've always had to have a way to get food to eat. And our way of doing those things has changed over time. But yet, anytime somebody can show you a faster, easier, cheaper, better way of doing things, of course you're going to do that the new way. If it's good enough, cheap enough, and better than the old way of doing things, then you'll switch, and quickly. And like you said, we've seen it back.
I mean, you say that, except that there are intuitions and knee-jerk responses that run contrary to that, though, right? I mean, so if it were strictly speaking totally self-evident, then the Romans would have seen this same pattern. They would have recognized it, would have motivated their innovation and so forth. So it's not totally self-evident. And the other piece of evidence I would point to today is that people are denying that this can happen again with new technologies right now. They're saying, well, it doesn't matter how cheap solar power and batteries get or how cheap electric cars get. They'll never, this was what we've been hearing for 15 years. They will never compete with, they will never be able to disrupt the ironclad grip that, the fossil fuel industry or the incumbent energy sector has, or the automotive industry. There's people yes, it's a better value proposition could come along, and people might see the logic of switching, but they won't be able to because of X, Y, or Z, this power of incumbents and so forth. And so there's a lot of resistance and denial to what you just pointed out. I mean, yes, on the one hand, it is commonsensical. It is, just a natural inclination and part of human nature to economize, and there's just a very simple underlying logic there, of course. On the other hand, it isn't quite that simple, because there is room for pushback, and we're seeing it now, right? And we're seeing the onus is absolutely on anyone who would argue, well, no, electric vehicles won't outcompete cars. It doesn't matter that that they can do the same job for a fraction of the cost with none of the pollution, and then the last 10 times, million miles, 10 times longer than the average combustion engine. It doesn't matter about those advantages, yada, yada, yada. I have doubts that this transformation is going to happen, or that it will happen quickly, that it will take only a decade or two and not in the next 50 to 100 years. We see that kind of pushback constantly. The doubters and naysayers constantly, that same story. So it isn't as simple as it is at bottom. There's still a lot of pushback. And my mind, again, goes back to the example you mentioned of evolution, right? I mean, yes, on one hand, it's so elegant and it's so simple that when you even become aware of it, it's like, yes, of course, that makes perfect sense. It's simple enough you can explain it to a child. But there was a lot of pushback against evolution too, right?
Sure. Sure. For every technology, there are still people using vinyl records. There are still people, the Amish use horses and buggies, wagons, whatever. There are people, for various reasons, who don't adopt new technologies, and there always will be. And I guess there are still film camera buffs who, do photography with film, whatever. So there's still people who are using typewriters, but this is not the predominant way of doing these things. So there are far more words written every year now on computer than on typewriter. And I'm certain that, for every technology, there's an incumbent's playbook of, the same repertoire of responses that I just saw earlier today. Someone saying that robo-taxis are not going to be popular because most people will want to keep their car. A car is more than just a form of transportation. It's a personal space where you can have your decorations stuck to the dashboard and you can play your music. And if you want to leave something in it, it's a storage location. When you go into a shop or something, you can leave your valuables locked in the car and not have to worry about them. So it's more than just, but people said the same thing about horses. Horses are more than just transportation. You can use them to plow your field in the springtime, and then you hitch them to the carriage when you want to go into town and do your shopping. And they're friends. And they have names. How many people name their cars now? Some people do, but your horse had a name, and it knew the way home. So if you wanted to, you could drift off or fall asleep or whatever else, and the horse would get you home. So we've had self-driving cars, back in the 1800s when horses knew the way home. But yet when horses weren't economically viable anymore, when a car could give you 10 times as much horsepower for the same cost, then we invented canned dog food. And that's when canned dog food was invented, that made out of horse meat. And it was horse meat ground, mixed together with oats. Why did they use oats? Because that's what we were feeding to horses. So when you get rid of the horses, you don't need the fuel for the horses anymore either. So yeah, people have said, we'll always have horses. We still have horses. We still have horse races. There are still people who love horses and don't mistreat them. The horse, if you're a horse today, you're probably living life better than any horse did in the 1800s when you had to actually work for a living. Even race horses, people to care for them and whatever and love them. But at the same time, they're not the predominant way of getting around. They were for 6,000 years. They were or I guess walking, but also horses were. And longevity does nothing, to save you. Like I said with Neanderthals, they were the predominant form of life in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. They lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands, and then they were replaced over about a 10,000 year period. It was a matter of a few thousand years where Homo sapiens came along, and we were better at making tools. And we lived a greater density of us per unit area than them, because we were able to get food, able to store food, things that they were not as good at doing. So they got replaced, and it's happened, many times with different technologies over time. Different inventions, business models, and ideas get replaced. New ideas pop up. We've seen it in all sorts of things, not just technologies, but in the book I give several graphs of ideas that have popped up over the concept of women's rights. And Google has gone through books and sorted them by year, and they've scanned millions of books word for word. And you can do a search on Google Ngram Viewer, it's called. So it's part of the Google Books project. And you can see how the popularity of different ideas increased over time, or decreased over time. And there are ideas that just went, that just took off over. In some cases, it's a slow growth over time. In other cases, it's a new technology, a new idea. So nobody was talking about transistors until we invented the transistor. The people who invented it or discovered it invented the term for it, and therefore all of a sudden people start talking about transistors. Tesla invents the alternating current engine motor, and alternating current motor takes off and the phrase alternating current takes off in popularity over time in the late 1800s. But also more abstract things, like I said, the concept of women's rights, or whatever else, high quality Japanese products. Back in the 1950s and 60s, nobody was talking about high quality Japanese products. But W. Edward Deming teaches his ideas of management, focusing on quality. And the Japanese, by the 1970s, the phrase high quality Japanese products is becoming much more common. By the 1980s and 90s, Japanese cars are taking over the car market. And by the 90s, parents are saying, why can't our kids make products as well as the Japanese can? Why can't our kids learn math and science and become engineers that run the companies that are making high quality products? And what's going on here? We're going to lose out to them. And now the same thing is happening with Chinese cars. 10, 15 years ago, nobody was even thinking about Chinese cars. Now they're making great quality cars for the price.
Nobody was thinking about them except Tony.
Yeah, a few people could see where this was going, which is that cars are basically, he called them smartphones on wheels, and they have a lot of the same technologies: the electric motors, the lithium-ion batteries, the digital cameras that are allowing them to drive themselves around, software, AI software. Look at how much better AI has gotten in just the past couple of years, and now we have cars that drive themselves. And like you said, it'll be the position of the person who doubts these technologies who will have to prove why this will be the exception, rather than the literally hundreds and hundreds, thousands of cases we've seen before of this sort of thing. Something's 10 times better, cheaper, good enough in quality, low enough in price, that it takes over the market in quickly. It's not always 13 years or even 10 or 15. We've seen some that are faster than that. So one of the most innovative sectors that I found was food and agriculture. Is the genetically modified sugar beet that went from literally 0% of the market to 100% of the market in 2 growing seasons. So spring of one year to the autumn of the next year. So it was a little over a year. That was like large language models did the same thing. Basically nobody had heard of ChatGPT to most people had tried it at least once, or at least most economically active people. So, elderly, maybe not so much, but people who do text creation or work at office jobs, work at laptop type jobs, went from never having heard of ChatGPT to having used it, in a 2-year period, 1 year period. But food and agriculture, like you mentioned, synthetic dyes, that are not only used for fabrics, but also used for food. All sorts of technologies like that just change the world. And if you look at it, year by year, you see an S-shaped curve over a 10, 15-year period. If you zoom out to a longer timeline, it's basically a step. The technologies go from being, very few people use them to widely adopted in the marketplace. And then that kicks off new innovations, new revolutions, new unforeseen and unexpected consequences. And like you said, we see it not only for high technology, we see it for simple things too, carpenter's nails. We've seen it for military technologies. We see it for illegal things. We see it in communist countries. Russia adopting the tractor, basically the same time frame. Nuclear weapons. We've seen it for drugs. I mean, literal. I mean, not just medicines, but I mean literal. Fentanyl and crystal meth. So, like I said, trying to relax sometimes and not think about technology and how technology has changed. I'd sometimes read articles on other subjects, just pick something random that sounded like it could be interesting. And it turns out they're talking about how one technology replaced another in a 10-year period. And crystal meth was a great example. So the US government, in about 2006, we had a big problem with crystal meth, with people using pseudoephedrine, which is the key ingredient that's found in Sudafed cough syrup. So people were taking cough syrup and turning it into crystal meth. And the U.S. federal government, which has never done anything wrong in all of human history before, decided, okay, we're going to crack down on this problem by banning. We're going to take away cough syrup from the 99.9% of people who don't use it to make crystal meth, and in order to take it away from the people who do. So they banned cough syrup, and we found another way. There was other ways of making crystal meth, one of which was using a chemical called phenyl-2-propanone, which you can make from ingredients you can get from a hardware store. Basically, instead of little bottles of cough syrup, you can produce it by the barrel full instead. And as a result, P2P crystal meth, or phenyl-2-propanone crystal meth, just wiped out pseudoephedrine-based crystal meth over a 10-year period, and it makes much larger quantity. It's not coming from plants anymore. It's being synthesized from chemicals that you can get at a hardware store in very large quantities. It makes it much cheaper, and it takes a problem that was a big deal. This is when like Breaking Bad was on TV. It takes a big problem and made it just 10 times worse, because now it's much cheaper. And then we saw the same thing again with fentanyl. We've seen this multiple times before in illicit markets, in military technologies, communist countries and capitalist countries. High technology and simpler things today and in the past. And by today, I mean, we're in the midst of some of these disruptions now, of X-shaped curves of one technology taking off. Solar, how many graphs have you seen in solar, wind, and batteries versus coal and natural gas and oil forming an X-shaped curve?
The latest one, you and I saw this one earlier. I think one of us, maybe it was me, but one of us posted this on on our social media platforms. The example of Greece and this country of Greece adopting solar and wind and abandoning coal for electricity generation. And it's just the exact X curve, the exact X-shaped curve, the X that marks disruption. That's straight out of the pattern of progress. It's just a quintessentially iconic pattern that is part of the pattern of progress that you describe. And it's the globe, the world trajectory for solar and wind adoption and coal disadoption lags behind that. The X isn't fully formed there for the planet as a whole, because the global markets don't always proceed in lockstep with the same timing. There are leaders and there are laggards, but among the leaders, you can already see the full X curve, and it's astonishing how clear it is. And one other thing that's interesting is that some of these things happen behind the scenes, invisibly to public, to consumers, and a disruption can occur, follow the same exact pattern, and it can be occurring on a business to business basis, on a B2B basis, up the supply chain, out of sort of the view of the public, or out of the consumer's eye, and all the same, it's following the same dynamic. One fun example is that most of the world's cheese is now curdled with chymosin, the enzyme, that is produced using the technology precision fermentation, which we've we coined, the RethinkX's research team coined the term precision fermentation in 2019, but that technology has existed for a longer time. And the use of precision fermentation, reprogramming microbes like yeast to produce specific molecules, that has disrupted cheese production. And the old and very ugly way of obtaining chymosin to curdle cheese was from the rennet, from an extract from calves' stomachs.
Yeah.
Right. Pretty gruesome to have to obtain it that way in order to curdle the world's cheese. Well, that was the case prior to the 1990s, and then, again, same pattern, but out of view of the public. So that this is another thing that's quite extraordinary, is that these technological disruptions and the pattern of progress is happening all around us, not all of which is visible, not all of which is plain to see. Some of it is in areas that we don't see. You mentioned nuclear weapons. In military applications, this invisibility is in many cases deliberate, but in some instances it's simply up the supply chain between businesses, and you wouldn't know it unless you really went hunting for it, which you did.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of this is business to business, because, new technologies tend to be relatively expensive for their performance. So the Tesla Model S was like that. The range wasn't as good as a internal combustion engine car, and it was relatively expensive. And the cost has come down over time to the point now where, presumably they're making these cyber cabs, for $20,000, $30,000, something like that. It doesn't really matter what their cost of making it is, because they're not going to be selling these things. Presumably, they're going to be operating them as taxis. But a lot of technologies start out like that. They start out expensive, they get cheaper over time. So therefore, the first applications are often military technologies. They're often medical things. So you mentioned rennet from cows' stomachs. You have to get it from, you have to kill a baby cow, a calf, to get it. To get the rennet to make cheese. But insulin, they used to get insulin from the pancreases of animals. So you'd have to kill, from slaughterhouses, you'd kill animals, take their pancreases, the cattle and pigs, take the pancreas and extract the insulin. And I mean, that was a disruptive technology too, where literally over a couple of year period, we went from not knowing what to do about diabetes to having knowing that insulin is the key chemical and being able to get it from animal pancreases. And that's the primary way that we got it, until the 1970s. Genentech figures out precision fermentation, figures out how to genetically modify microorganisms to produce insulin. And then we no longer have to extract it from animal pancreases. It starts out as a medical technology or a military technology. Things often do. They go to businesses and they go to people. So VCRs used to be for TV stations. Back before people had them in their homes, television stations would record TV shows and then play them using industrial VCRs, basically. So a lot of technologies start out that way. It used to be only governments could launch satellites into space, and now private companies are doing it. So yeah, things get cheaper over time. So they often start out as B2B disruptions, just because businesses use things. Whatever the latest technology is, if you're not keeping up with it and it's core to your industry, you'll be put out of business if you don't adopt it. So businesses tend to adopt these technologies first. Things like we mentioned, like synthetic dyes, are just fundamentally a business disruption. So if you're going to dye fabric, then of course, if I can make a pure chemical in basically any quantity you want at a low price that you can use to dye fabrics and get uniformly dyed fabrics, you're going to do that instead of extracting dyes from plants. Actual flowers and plants that grow, and like I said, we saw with crystal meth too. So that came from plants, pseudoephedrine, and then we replace it by just synthesizing through chemicals to get that chemical that we wanted. And precision fermentation is an extension of that concept. So if you can get lactoferrin, if you can get casein protein or whatever else by producing it, just that chemical in any quantity you want, and it's lower price. It's yeah, of course the switch will happen. Of course it'll be quick. And everybody says, oh, I will always want, cheese made from cow's milk or whatever. I will always want, but it's not like, but when the new technology came along for making insulin, it's not like people said, "Oh, I always want real pancreas-derived insulin" or something like that. Um, whatever, yeah, whatever solves the problem, it's cheaper, it's better, and people start using it. And
Yeah, and people are. I mean, we're notoriously bad at predicting future preferences too. Humans are humans. People are overwhelmingly risk averse and pessimistic about changes in habits and patterns and rituals and lifestyle choices. Uh, and so there's always, a basic, or I should say, a baseline bias against new technology in one's choices and one's personal patterns and routines and so forth. But this is reliably misleading. And so I suppose that you mentioned earlier, it can be part of the incumbent's playbook to refer to, a survey showed that 99% of people, when we surveyed them in 1996, said they would never buy anything with over the internet. And, I it wasn't very long before people were buying everything you could imagine over the over the internet. So that sort of skepticism is part of the, just part of the routine. I am hesitating to use the word pattern, but I guess this is all part of the larger pattern here, which is that there are predictable responses that we make on an individual basis. There are predictable responses that we make as industries, as markets, even as entire societies. And the fact that there's a pattern to see there historically bears upon, it has a profound implications for the future, for looking ahead and being able to anticipate when and where we're likely to see those same patterns repeat. So I think that just to kind of loop back around to the start of the conversation here, what began as a research project focused on understanding the past so that we could better predict or at least anticipate and plan for the future, turned into a really monumental piece of work that lays down a phenomenal, comprehensive corpus of empirical data that validates explanations for why we see what we see. We're no longer, thanks to your work, and yes, of course, you're built as all scientists do. We build on the shoulders of the giants who came before us, and so yes, that's true. It doesn't mean that your work isn't absolutely remarkable. It absolutely is, but it does build upon a previous corpus of work. But what all of this is aiming us towards is a better capacity to see what's coming down the pike ahead of us, and I think that's the explanatory power that having a very large body, a very, very large corpus of data gives you is enormously valuable. It's valuable for all of humanity in this moment. There are huge changes barreling towards us. And if we can understand our past a bit better, then there's a hope that we can plan for and therefore navigate these treacherous waters ahead and all of this stuff that's heading towards us better, more safely, with greater stability, with greater, doing a better job of avoiding the harms and maximizing the benefits and so on and so forth. And so I think that the pattern of progress is emblematic of a larger piece of work and a larger project, which is to gain more clarity and better understanding of how technology arises and then is adopted, how older technologies are disadopted, how this impacts industries, economies, entire societies, and then what all of that spells for us as we look ahead with crazy new tech coming at us. So, I mean, it's a remarkable piece of work at a very, very important moment in human history, We really are at a crossroads, and yeah, no better time to get get a better understanding of why we see the pattern that we see. So this is another piece that I think that's so important with the work that you've done. Is this isn't just a, oh, isn't this neat, this pattern that I found? It sheds a lot of light on the dynamics, on the causes, the drivers of why we see that pattern emerge over and over again. And when you understand something, that explanatory power often translates into predictive power. And without either of those things, you were just flying blind. You're just flying by the seat of your pants. And so I think that that's a it for anybody who's watching and anybody who's listening. I think that a huge part of the value of this incredible work of scholarship that you've done here, Brad, this extraordinary research project that's now come to fruition, is that it is valuable for all of us because it sheds light on our future in very, very important ways at a very, very important time. So yeah, I just again I want to be the first to thank you for this extraordinary achievement, and it is a big deal. It really does matter, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on what's really sort of the core goal that I had in writing this book, which is helping other people to see this pattern. So, like I said, once you start to see it, you see it everywhere. And to teach other people what this pattern is of a new technology being developed, taking over a market in a short period of time. And because it's cheaper, because it's faster, easier, better, whatever else, because we need people who can understand or think about what the implications are for various technologies, and they're not all positive, and they're not always positive. I'm not trying to imply that every new technology has made the world a better place without having negative consequences, because there are plenty of negative consequences to to coal and CO2 emissions. Nuclear technology has given us nuclear power. It's been key in medical applications, but it's also given us nuclear weapons and things like that. So nuclear waste. So it's not always positive, and the implications are not always obvious either. I mean, unintended consequences and unforeseen consequences of new technologies. So that's why I subtitled the book, how radically cheaper, easier, faster, better technologies and ideas rapidly change the world. It doesn't necessarily imply change for the better. It just means change the world. That there's some aspects that have caused great periods of turmoil and tumult that maybe took decades to resolve, or that still aren't resolved. So when it comes to new technologies that we're seeing now, from robo-taxis and humanoid robots and solar, wind, and battery powered electrical grid and precision fermentation, these things can easily have some very negative consequences, or just some consequences that will cause turmoil for a long time. So one obvious implication of a taxi-based transportation system, on-demand autonomous electric vehicles, would be that we need a lot fewer vehicles, and that just means a lot of people put out of work in making cars. I mean, this is the core of the a very important industry in the U.S., in Germany, in Japan, some of in China as well. They're the largest car manufacturer. I just named the 4 largest economies in the world, and they have automobiles, at their heart. And we could see, the 2030s could look a lot like the 1930s if we're not careful, if we don't understand these things. Say, hey, we've seen this pattern before, and let's avoid the negative consequences if we can. And that means that we need people who understand these disruptions and can think about their implications. And I can't do it all myself, so I said I'll compile the biggest examples that I can think of from human history. And I've tried to do that with electricity and the transistor and the radio and the automobile, the airplane, just all the things that have been the biggest technologies in history. And I show how they're all sort of interconnected. And I try to give examples, of the unintended, unforeseen consequences, hoping that, that'll help people think through when it comes to robo-taxis, when it comes to precision fermentation, when it comes to SWB, what that will mean for land use in cities and housing values, and what will humanoid robots and artificial intelligence mean for education. I mean, we're already seeing, in higher education, professors complaining that I have to use AI to grade my students' reports that have all been written by AI. We're just having 2 copies of ChatGPT, work both ends of the process here. And does that mean that people aren't really learning? But people have said that in the past too, that printed books are going to destroy people's memory. So we're not, if you don't have to memorize something, if it's written down on paper, then nobody's going to memorize anything. But on the other hand, printed matter has also greatly expanded people's access to new ideas. But people are saying the same thing now about AI, and maybe aspects of it are right. Maybe there is going to be negative consequences. Maybe there'll be negative consequences that last for decades. And isn't it better for us to be thinking about these now? So my idea is write the book. I couldn't put all of the disruptions that I've investigated into it. So I selected about 150 out of about 1,500 that I investigated at the time that the writing was done. So literally 1 in 10 technologies, a 10x disruption, to the best 1/10, or at least the ones that I thought were, interesting, made it into the book. And there's plenty of other material to look into. And I'm hoping that, that people will read this and it'll just be the starting point for their own thinking about technology and implications, social implications, geopolitical implications, environmental implications. I have a little bit about each of those at the end of the book. But I don't go into as much depth as I could have or should have or would have if I had rewritten this, because my purpose here was just to sort of compile the examples, as many examples that I could think of that would be sort of a core foundation. And then I hope that people will take that and run with it, basically come up with their own examples. I obviously, one downside to this book, as many books about technology and history are, is that it's very much focused on Europe and North America, because that's where the data is, or at least the data that I can read anyway, as someone who doesn't read Chinese or any other non-Western language. If people are able to find examples from their own countries, from their own industry, from whatever catches their interest, and is able to come up with new examples, that maybe volume 2, I should start working on volume 2, collecting even more examples of the pattern of progress. Or there are other ways to go with it. There are plenty of investigations that are just energy related, just food and agriculture related, just transportation related. But since these things are all interconnected with each other, I had to put all of them into this work. But there's plenty of work that can be done looking just at individual industries, looking at individual countries, and how individual cities. Look at Detroit, the Detroit area where you live, how much of its history is tied up with the car, obviously. But there are plenty of places in the world that have piggybacked on one new hit technology that was growing, and there'll be new sort of centers of progress in the future, of places that whoever unlocks the autonomous electric car, and then there's also the autonomous electric truck. There's also whole fields of precision fermentation, the whole field of humanoid robotics. There's plenty still to be done in AI, and we're just getting started with these technologies. We're not at the end by any means of what will be the next Hollywood in the world of AI generated video. So I sort of tease people at the end with what the implications could be for land use, for air quality, solving environmental problems, building a world of abundance where people have access to great, much more electric power, just power in general, access to much more computational ability, artificial intelligence, better algorithms, access to more transportation ability, per person per year. So yeah, we're just getting started as far as some of these technologies go, and we don't know what the consequences will be. And the only way to figure it out in advance is to start thinking about it, learn the pattern of progress from history, see how it's playing out today, and think about what the consequences will be in the future. We need more Tony Sebas, and the way to get that is, write essentially the textbook that will help to make you a better thinker about disruption and technology, economics and history, the environment, and humanity in general. If we want to get to a world of sort of stellar power for people, stellar ability of transportation, stellar levels of ability of energy consumption and GDP and everything else, then we need stellar humans. We need people who are able to think in this pattern, and see things the way that Tony does, if we can.
Well, it's absolutely fantastic. Seriously, the book is a monumental achievement. It's really is a just an absolute masterpiece. I'm lucky to have a hard copy in my hands already. Anybody watching this, do yourself a favor, head out, grab either the paperback or the digital version. It's available now. This is only the first of many conversations that Brad, you and I will have that touch on the pattern of progress, whether we mean the book or whether we mean the pattern itself, which is deeply infused through all of our work at RethinkX. And yeah, this is only this is a launch pad for a lot more conversation and investigation and research to come. So again, congratulations, man! Thanks so much for this, incredible work. What an achievement! And I'm just glad that you've managed to take this project from what were humble beginnings a number of years ago to such an incredible fruition. It's fantastic. So yeah, we're going to talk about this again. So stay tuned. It's funny how we use words from technologies that are basically obsolete. The vestiges hang with us for generations after the technologies themselves are gone. But yeah, this will just be the first of many conversations like this. So check us out for the next one. And until then, thanks very much for joining. And thank you, Brad. It's absolutely a pleasure talking to you. And the pattern of progress, everybody. The pattern of progress. Go grab it now. You'll thank me.
It's on Amazon, and then there's a link on rethinkx.com. Awesome. Or you can just look for me, Brad Libby, BRADD LIBBY, and the pattern of progress.
Fantastic. Thanks, man.
Great. Thank you.